All right, Shabbos, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Habali L'Tova, Alison Adam Steinmetz, in memory of Adam's grandfather, Rabbi Sheldon Steinmetz, Harav Shlomo Tzvi Ruvain Ben Shimon Zichrono Livracha, Semi Malka Esther, in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib Ben Arakoin, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, Hinda Bas Hanach Ephraim, and in memory of their dear family friends, Staff Sergeant Naftali Yona Gordon Hashem Yikom Damo, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Leah Bas Shmuel, Zachrini Shulamis Bas Shmuel, and Esther Bas Zechariah. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, in the schus of continued refuah for Shulamis Chana Bas Susha, and Shani Tapper and family Le'ili Nishmas Yoshua Ben Yitzchak Zichron Livracha on the occasion of his 19th yahrzeit, and by Avram Svi and Malka Klein, in gratitude towards Grandpap Alan Wiseman for all he has done and continues to do for our family. Beautiful thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you for all the beautiful messages. All those who need refuah shaving together, Kol Cholei Yisrael, all of the Neshama Shavin Aliyah, the families in Nechama, on Kash Baruch Hu should continue to shower Besoros Tovos and brachos upon all of Klal Yisrael. With that, our daf today, we have a really exciting daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Ayin Ches 78, and we are picking up on Ayin Zayin Amud Beis 77b at the Mishnah, bottom of the daf. Dam Shenis Ari B'mayim. So we'll say some really interesting topics over here for today that are going to take us through the next little bit. Dam Shenis Ari B'mayim. If blood gets mixed in with water, now obviously we're talking about over here about sacrificial blood that gets mixed together with water. So the shaila, of course, is what is going to be the status of the sacrificial blood. So what's the halacha? Im yesh ba maris dam kosher. As long as it looks like blood, ultimately, again, the mixture is going to be kosher. Kosher means that it is fit for sacrificial use. Fit for sacrificial use. Good. That's case number one. Next, nisari bayayin. So here's an interesting case. What happens if sacrificial blood gets mixed together with wine? Right? So obviously, in the water case, there's a very easy litmus test. What's the litmus test? If there's so much water that the blood no longer looks like blood, okay, then it's going to be invalid. If it looks like blood, then it's going to be kosher. The problem with wine, of course, is that wine looks like blood. So the shaila, of course, is how do we determine if the mixture is going to be kosher? So it's arei bayayin, roa ki'ilu mayin. This is very interesting. So when the sacrificial blood gets mixed with wine, we view the wine as if it was water. Meaning what? And we look at it based on if this amount of wine was water, would the sacrificial blood look like blood or not? If it would still look like blood, then the mixture would be kosher. If it wouldn't look like blood, then the mixture ultimately again is going to be invalid. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Rowan also, it's about 8 lines up from the end of the page. Rowan also yain kiluhu mayim va'omrim va'omdin im hayad dam shnis arif kan nikar b'mayim halalu kash l'zrika. So we'll say, so look at these first two cases. So case number one is where again sacrificial blood gets mixed in with water. In that case, as long as the mixture retains its appearance of blood, then ultimately again it's going to be kosher. Doesn't have an appearance of blood, not kosher. Case two, sacrificial blood gets mixed in with wine. So we'll say, so in this case, you can't use the appearance test. It's going to look like blood regardless. So what do? I view the wine as if it was water. Now, based on that ratio, would the blood still look like blood? If the answer is yes, it's kosher. If the answer is no, it's pasul. Good, that's case two. Next. Nisari b'dam behema b'dam. We'll say case number three is where the sacrificial blood gets mixed in with other invalid blood. So once again, appearance is going to look like blood no matter what. The shaila just is, how do we view the mixture ultimately again of the valid blood and the invalid blood together? Now again, Rashi points out over here, the behema is the behema of chulin, right? This is a non-sacrificial animal. So what do we do over here? Roin also ki'iluhu mayim. So ultimately, again, once again, what we do for non-sacrificial blood is the same thing we do for wine. Essentially, we view the blood as if it was water, and then we figure out based on this ratio, would the mixture still look like blood, in which case it's going to be kosher, or would it look like water, in which case it is going to be pasul. Okay, so we'll say, so you begin to see a theme over here, right? So again, case number one, wine gets mixed with water. Simple. Does it retain its appearance of blood or not? If it does, kosher. If it doesn't, puzzle. Case number two, blood gets mixed in with wine. Appearance is not a good litmus test. So we'll view the wine as if it was water. Based on this ratio, would it still look like blood? Kosher. Wouldn't look like blood? Puzzle. Case number three, blood gets mixed in with non-sacrificial blood, chulin blood. So Tanakama says, same thing. View the blood as if it was water, and then see, based on this ratio, would the mixture still look like blood? Kosher. Would it look like blood? Puzzle. Now, top of Ayin Ches, 78a, comes along Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Ein dam mevatel dam. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. A mixture of blood with blood is going to be different because dam is not mevatel dam. Blood cannot negate blood. Now, what does that mean? Go back, I'm sorry, for one more second, back to 77b, to the last Rashi on the daf. Ein dam mevatel dam, Rashi says, de min b'mino lo batal. That's what you're going to spend more time on today. Min lo batal means two like items can never be negated one in the other. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda holds, afilu tipa l'soch kli gadol kashla zrika. So ultimately, again, Rabbi Yehuda holds that as long as there is sacrificial blood is not batal. It's not batal. So fundamental machlokes in the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. When you have chulin blood mixed in with sacrificial blood, so what do you do over here? The Tanakama says we view the chulin blood as if it was water and see if this amount of water was would the mixture still look like blood, in which case it's kosher. If it would be so diluted that it would lose its appearance as blood, it would be puzzle. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, ein dam mevatel dam. Once there's sacrificial blood there, it's sacrificial blood. And no matter how much blood is there, so the sacrificial blood always remains dominant and therefore is kosher. Fascinating. Again, more about that later. Next, this back to 78a, last two words on the first line. Last word. Okay, so I'll say, so now in this fourth case, this is an interesting case. What happens if sacrificial blood becomes mixed in with invalid sacrificial blood? Whatever the case is. Right? Rashi says, this is interesting. For example, let's say you have pigol blood. Right, so sacrificial blood that gets mixed in with pigol blood. So what's the halacha case? So in that situation, ultimately, again, yishpoch la'ama. What does yishpoch la'ama mean? Yishpoch la'ama means you have to pour it down the channel. Now again, on both sides. So this is actually, take a look at Rashi. Yishpoch la'ama va'afilu hakasher rabba v'chein dama tamtzis yishpoch la'ama. Now what's the amma? We're going to talk more about this a little bit later on. I mean, not today, but later on. So the amma there was a channel that ran through the Beis Hamikdash, and literally again, that channel took out certain, we'll call it the term wastewater, carbonic water, sacrificial remnants out into the Kidron Valley. Again, like I said, we'll talk more about the mechanics of that a little bit later. Enough, in this, something fascinating happens. In this last case, where invalid sacrificial blood gets mixed in with other sacrificial blood, right? So the halacha is the resulting mixture is puzzle. What do you do with it? So the Gemara says, Mishnah says, put it in the channel and let it flow out into the Kidron Valley. B'damatamsis, same thing, damatamsis. Now both say, now what's damatamsis? If you remember again back to the beginning of the Masechta, right? So again, first step in the sacrificial process, first step, shchita. Although shchita is not really an avoda, but shchita. Then Kabbalah. Remember again, by Kabbalah, what are you receiving? Right? The life, which is the blood that initially spurts out. Obviously, after you slaughter an animal, blood continues to flow out. That blood that continues to flow out is what's called dam hatamsis, like residual blood. Residual blood is not kosher for sacrificial use. So therefore, again, so there's two cases over here. So in other words, case number one is where invalid sacrificial blood gets mixed in with valid sacrificial blood, or dam hatamsis, which is the residual blood, gets mixed in with kosher sacrificial blood. In both of these cases, blood that is not usable for sacrificial purposes gets mixed in with blood which is usable for sacrificial purposes. And in both of these cases, the remedy is the same. The resulting mixture cannot be used no matter what the ratio is. And therefore, what do you do with it? Pour it down the drain, right? The drain, right? Pour it into the channel, pour it into this channel in the Beis Hamikdash, and ultimately, again, the channel will take the, I hate to use the word waste, because it's still in the Beis Hamikdash, will take the invalid mixture out into the Kidron Valley. Incredible. Now, again, I will say, interestingly enough, like, in other words, why isn't it bottle like everything else, or why can't you use like the same litmus test they've been using up until now? We'll see in the Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer Machshir, Rabbi Eliezer Machshir, and Rabbi Eliezer ultimately again says that it's kosher. Now again, which case is he referring to? Is he referring to ultimately again the dam puzzle or the dam tamsis? We'll see, and we'll see his logic. Now, listen to this. Im lach v'nasan kosher. Furthermore, the Gemara says, halacha l'maisa, if the Kohen did not ask and instead applied this blood, then ex post facto, it's kosher. So it's very interesting. So as much as in these last two cases over here, where the sacrificial blood gets mixed into proper blood, or where the damat tamsis gets mixed into proper blood. So the halacha is, mixture is invalid, and it has to be poured down the channel. However, if the Kohen did not ask, and instead he just sprinkled it, halacha l'maisa, it's kosher. Kosher. Which tells you what? That me'ikar adin, according to the letter of the law, is kosher. And obviously, again, there's some rabbinic legislation that's happening over here that's preventing us from using it. Okay, more about that in the Gemara. So we'll say, some really interesting cases over here. So we'll say, let's focus on our initial cases, right? If you look at the first three cases, case number one, blood gets mixed in with water. How do you calculate? So what's the determinant if the mixture is valid or not? If it looks like blood. As long as it maintains its appearance of blood, ultimately, again, it's called sacrifice. Case number two, wine gets mixed in with sacrificial blood. What's the halacha? We view the wine as if it was water, right? And if in that ratio it would still maintain its appearance of blood, it's going to be kosher. Case number three, sacrificial blood gets mixed with blood of chulin animals. What's the halacha? Same thing. Ultimately, again, we view it as if it was water. If it would have maintained the appearance of blood, it is going to be kosher. Incredible. Although in that last case, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein dam mevatel dam." Okay, good. Let's analyze. So we'll say, so this idea, so focusing really on this idea of the blood and water, right? So when it comes to the mixture of blood and water, so everything depends on the appearance. So the Gemara says, when do we say that as long as there's the appearance of blood, the mixture is considered to be valid sacrificial? When is that? Ella shenaflu mayim dam. That's when the water is flowing into the blood. So in other words, I guess the imagery is, I have my klisharis, my service utensil of sacrificial blood, and water drips into that blood. That's when we say that as long as the blood retains its appearance as blood that is still valid for sacrificial use. However, but if the case is the reverse, if the blood is falling into the water, then rishon batal, then each drop of blood that falls into the water is batal in the water. Hear the distinction over here? If you have water falling into the blood, then ultimately, again, as long as the appearance remains blood, the mixture is going to be kosher. But if the blood is dripping into the water, then each drop that falls in is batal in the water. Incredible. So Gemara says, by the way, just so you understand, if you were to take blood and fully pour the blood into the water, then the same halacha would apply. As long as it retains its appearance of blood, it's going to be kosher. What the Gemara is saying over here is, if you dropped it drop by drop of blood into the water, even though the resulting mixture still looks like blood, each drop as it comes in is batal in the water. So the Gemara says, interesting enough, Amar Papa, ula inyan kis enokain. Now, That is true by sacrificial blood. That is not like kisui hadam. Remember again, what's the halacha by kisui? Then kisui hadam means that if you shecht a chaya or an oaf, you shecht fowl or chaya, non-domesticated animal. There's a halacha that you have to cover the blood after the animal is beshechted. This has nothing to do with karbanos, right? This is just even today. Even today, you shecht a chicken, you got to go ahead and you have to cover up the blood. The halacha doesn't apply by behema, doesn't apply to like a regular domesticated animal, only to non-domesticated animals and fowl. So the Gemara says, interesting. Papa says, le'inyan kisui eino kain. Now this is not true for kis adam. So what does that mean? That halacha l'maisa, if you were to go ahead and let's say shechta chicken, and then you took the blood and you dropped it drop by drop into water, the blood would bottle in the water, and you would still have to do kisui hadam on that blood. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Eino kain, dafilu not almost right across in Rashi. Oh, well, it is right across Rashi. Dafilu nasan dam mayim. Even if you took the blood of the slaughtered animal, right, the slaughtered chicken, and you put it into water, im yesh bo maris dam chayiv lechasos. If it has the appearance of blood, you are obligated to go ahead and cover it. V'lo aminan kama batale, and we don't say that the initial drops of blood are bottled in the water. So both say. So watch these two halachas. So let me just show you what's just happened over here. Right, we'll just trace the progression. So how did we start? We started with the case of sacrificial blood that gets mixed with water. So the Gemara says, what's the halacha of that mixture? As long as the mixture looks like blood, ultimately, again, fit for sacrificial use. So the Gemara comes along and says, Rav Chia bar Abba says, that's talking about where the water was mixed into the blood. However, if the blood was mixed in the water drop by drop, ultimately, even if the resulting mixture looks like blood, it's still going to be invalid. Why? Because every drop of blood that falls into the water is bottled in the water. That's the halacha of our Mishnah. Then the Gemara says, oh, by the way, Papa says, you should just know, but by kisui hadam, this would not be true. So if you were to shecht the chicken, take the blood and drop it drop by drop into water, right? Ultimately, again, the blood would not be bottled, and you would still be obligated to do kisui hadam on that mixture. Why the distinction between sacrificial and the mitzvah of kisui hadam? And the Gemara says very simple, lefi she'ein dichui b'mitzvahs. Because they will say ultimately, again, literally, again, lefi she'ein dichui b'mitzvahs, which means there's no such thing as a dichui means to set aside. There's no such thing as a mitzvah that is set aside for non-performance. Take a look at Rashi. This is very interesting. Lefi she'ein dichui b'mitzvahs. Even if the because you will say, now what happens? It's actually very interesting. It's fascinating. Rashi says, what's the dynamic? When you shecht that chicken and you take the blood, so what do? You drop the first drop into the water. What happens when that first drop falls into the water? What happens? Essentially it becomes to the water. But then the second drop comes in. And what happens with the second drop? It combines with the first. The third combines with the second and the first. The fourth, so on and so forth, until what happens at the end of the day? Ultimately, it looks like blood. Once it looks like blood, ultimately, again, that reinvigorates all of the previous droplets of blood that were placed into the water. Because by mitzvahs, once something is set aside for use of a mitzvah, it can never be permanently precluded for non-performance or non-use. It might be temporarily dormant, but ultimately, again, all of those, essentially what we're saying is like this. The droplets of blood of that chicken are set aside for use of a mitzvah. Which mitzvah? The mitzvah of kisui hadam, of covering the blood. So once it's set aside for the mitzvah, it can never be permanently precluded from performance. It could be temporarily set aside, like in other words, first droplet falls in, second droplet falls in, until that mixture looks like blood, it's not going to be, but once it looks like blood, everything is reinvigorated, because once something is marked for mitzvah use, ultimately, again, that designation never fully goes away. It may be temporarily shelved, but it never fully goes away. That's what it means, ein dichui. So both say, isn't that fascinating? So in other words, so therefore, once you shecht that chicken and that blood needs to be covered, that obligation is never set aside. So when you subsequently take a drop of blood and keep dripping a drop of blood into water, so right now I can't do it because the mixture doesn't look like blood. But once there's enough blood in that water to make it look like blood, the mitzvah obligation once again sets in. This is what's called ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs. Now, interestingly enough, Rashi ends off, v'lo amrina hol v'nitcha yitcha, v'lo shayech dichoy ela b'davar kedusha. So Rabbi say, herein lies a fascinating distinction between mitzvahs and kadshin and karbanos. By karbanos, there's yesh dichui eitzel karbanos. There is yesh dichui eitzel kadshin. By a karban, once something is set aside for non-use, it's forever non-usable. So therefore, again, going back for just a moment. So if you were to go ahead and take sacrificial blood and drop it at a time into water, what happens to that sacrificial blood? It's batal. It's batal. Each drop that comes into the water is batal. Even though at the end of it looks like blood, that's fine. But at the end of the day, each drop was batal. Mitzvahs are never negated for non-performance. And therefore, when you drop the little drop of chicken blood into the water, although at first glance there's nothing there, later on when all the droplets are in there, they form together and ultimately again reinvigorate the obligations for the mitzvah. So we'll say, fascinating concept. Yesh dichui eitzel kachim. So there is dichui by karbanos, but ultimately again, ein dichui b'mitzvahs. Now we'll say, just the hashkafa. Why distinction? So listen to this distinction. Karbanos is din in an animal. Is a din in an animal. I perform it, but at the end of the day, the cheftza of kedusha ultimately again is the animal. Mitzvahs are a din in us, in human beings. An animal could be forever set aside for non-use. It could happen, right? You do something invalid, and ultimately, again, the carbon is forever set aside for non-use. But by mitzvahs, which represent the yid, there's no such thing as a Jew who is forever set aside for non-use, for non-performance. There's no such thing as a Jew who is forever cut off by kedusha. Nothing as an animal, that animal is forever set aside for use, right? It's invalid. It's an animal. Okay, it was going to be a carbon now, it can forever never be a carbon. But by a mitzvah which represents a unit of a yid's self-actualization and kedusha, ein dichui eitzel mitzvahs. There's no such thing as a Jew who is set aside for non-use. There's no such thing as a mitzvah that is forever precluded from performance. An animal could be pushed aside for non-use. A Jew can never be forever precluded from spiritual actualization. We'll say, is that not the most incredible thing in the world that you've ever heard? And it's only Monday. Can you imagine what the rest of the week is going to be like? So we'll say, this is it. This is a bump sticker. Ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs. When it comes to my religious observance, when it comes to my religious performance, when it comes to my spiritual self-actualization, there is no dichui. There is no such thing as being set aside for non-performance. I can never be pushed to the side. I can mess up, I can make big mistakes, and I can kind of be like that blood that's dropped into the water. Because there are moments where both say, just like that little droplet of blood is essentially invisible, there are times where I mess up so badly that I make myself spiritually visible. But then something happens, which is if you keep at it, and if you keep going, droplet after droplet after droplet after droplet, once again the vision of blood reappears, and I'm ready to re-engage. I am that mitzvah. Karbanos, animals can be set on use. But mitzvahs, which represent the units of spiritual accomplishment of the Jew, ein dichui eitzel mitzvahs. There's no such thing as a Jew forever being precluded from spiritual growth and self-actualization. No matter how badly you mess up, no matter how diluted spiritually you get, keep at it, and ultimately, again, you'll be reconstituted and ready to engage. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Amrei Shlagish, Hapigol Vanos Ratam Shabbalan Vachlan Potter. So I'll say this is a very interesting case. If you have a bunch of sacrificial parts, and included in those sacrificial parts, right, is pigul and nosar and tameh. So this is quite the prohibited salad you got going on over here, right? So you've got pigul, nosar, tameh, and obviously some other components also in here, or well, presumably some other components in here, and everything got mixed, actually necessarily, and everything got mixed together. So obviously, again, everything got mixed together, and you ate from it. So Rashi points out over here that the case is kizayis mizeh or kizayis mizeh. So the kizayis of all of these prohibited items, but they're mixed together. Vachlan, and I ate it. So I say, what's halacha? Pater. Ultimately on pater. Now, why is that? It's very interesting. Why? So this is absolutely fascinating. Here's the issue. In order to be in violation of pigul, nosar, and tameh, you have to eat a kizayis of these items, right? The issue over here is because I have this challah, pigul, nosar, tameh, whenever I eat something, I can't be sure that I'm eating a kizayis of any one prohibited item. Because of that, therefore, halacha l'maisa, I'm pater. Now again, not good, right? Not good, right? But when we say pater, is I can't be punished for that. There can't be liability for that because it can't be demonstrated that I'm eating a kizayis of any prohibited matter. The Gemara says, so the Gemara is because it's possible that any one is being mavatal the other, right? So maybe there's so much pigul and nosar that's being mavatal the tameh, or there's so much tameh and pigul that it's being mavatal the nosar. So everything kind of combines with each other, and ultimately I don't have a kizayis. I don't necessarily have a kizayis of any one prohibited material. So first of all, see from here three things. Number one, shmamina isur mevatlin zeh. It's interesting enough. What do we see from Rabbi saying is that isur, right? Isurin, different prohibited items, ultimately again are mevatel each other. In fact, if you take a look at Rashi says over here, it's the first wide line in Rashi. Rashi says, Kishu loes osa befiv nivlal min l'so chavero miuto shazeh berubo shazeh ubat mitberov v'habatal b'chol min nosaf al mevatel. So the idea over here is because everything is mixed together, you don't know what you're eating, and therefore essentially one isser is mevatel another isser. So the Gemara says you learn three things from here. Number one could be mevatel another isser, right? Next, shmamina, no sein tam berov lav da'oraisa. So Rabbi said this is very interesting. The Gemara says, well, one second. If you notice, what doesn't the Gemara consider? The Gemara doesn't consider the fact that what we say, what does it taste like? In other words, Rabbi say the Gemara is presupposing that all of these items, the nosar, the pigul, and the tameh, are all dissimilar with different tastes. So the Gemara essentially, so if you notice, by the way, what doesn't the Gemara say? The Gemara doesn't say, well, why don't we say the mixture tastes like? Maybe like, tastes a lot like pigul. Right? So in other words, if you notice, we don't consider that what it tastes like. So what does that tell you? That tells you that taste is not a determinant biblically. That's what it tells you. That taste is not a determinant biblically. Shmamina, no sin tam that if something infuses a taste in the majority of a mixture, lav daraisa, that clearly, again, that is not a biblical determinant. Rashi says over here, hadam rabbanon b'chol du time beheter osra api sheheter berov lav daraisa lukos al di daraisa nihi nami draba mina chavero mikomakom time yoiv vike time the shir kisham. So ultimately, again, because the fact that we don't even look at, like in other words, like the Gemara doesn't say, if you have pigul and nosar time mixed together, let's see what it tastes like. And whichever one it tastes like, that's going to be what you're chayiv for. The Gemara doesn't even entertain that possibility, indicating to us that taste is not a biblical determinant. Next, ushmamina sasras sapek lo shma. What else do you see? That a non-definitive hasra is not a good hasra. Because most remember again, in this case over here, let's say I'm eating this mixture, pigul, nosar, tameh. Again, in order to be chayv hasra, what's going to be the hasra? What's the only hasra that the Eidim could give me? What can they give me? Right? They can't give me a definitive hasra. Right? Why? Because they don't know what I'm eating. Right? In other words, in this mixture are three prohibited items. So what are they going to say? Don't eat pigul, nosar, and tameh. Well, maybe I am eating all three. Maybe I'm eating only one of the three. Maybe I'm eating two. We see from here the fact that there's no liability is because hasras safek lo shma asra. In order for a warning to create liability, it has to be a definitive warning. A non-definitive warning can't generate liability. So therefore, I will say, amazingly enough, from this again, let's go through the case once more. I'm eating a mixture. No sartame. The Gemara is presupposing that these are three dissimilar items mixed together with dissimilar tastes. So what's the halacha? The halacha is I am not liable, right? So number one prohibited item can be mevatel another prohibited item. Number two, taste is not a biblical determinant in establishing identity. And number three, hasra safek non-definitive warning is not considered to be a warning. Okay, so we'll say, now watch this. Massive Rava. So Rava raises a question. I'm saying, now what the Gemara is going to focus on over here with Rava is the issue of taste, right? So lesson number two, which was that ultimately, again, the Gemara says, you see from this case, that tam, that taste, is not a biblical determinant of identity. That's what Rav is going to take issue with. So this is very interesting. If you make a dough of rice and wheat, so what's the halacha say? If the taste of the loaf ultimately, again, tastes like wheat, then what? Then the identity of the loaf is a wheat loaf. Now, I will say, if it's a wheat loaf, then what? It's chayvin challah. What's challah? Challah is the portion you have to separate and give to the Kohen. What do you see from here? What do you see from here? What do you see from here? That taste is a biblical determinant. Taste matters. Now, by the way, taste matters even though, right? Even though what? Even though the majority of the flour may be rice flour, but if it tastes like wheat, then what? It's wheat, which also, by the way, just for our purpose, just to make it a little bit more shaykhs, which would also mean you would wash on. Remember again, you don't wash on rice bread, right? Why not? I don't know. Is there such a thing as rice bread? Yeah, right. So remember again, because rice. Just want to point out, rice. The Torah only recognizes 5 types of grain, right? Wheat, barley, oat, spelt, and rye. Those are the 5 types of grain. Anything else is not a grain. So therefore, rice, although you can make rice flour and I guess rice bread, that's not a motzi. Cornbread is not a motzi. Now, cornbread today might be different because they mix in a lot of different things. But again, if you were to just make bread out of corn flour, it would not be a motzi. So I just want to point out over some more things like this. If you have a bread that is made both out of flour and rice flour, if it tastes like wheat, then you have to take challah, even though the majority of it is rice flour. So what do you see from here? That taste is a biblical determinant. Midrabanan. No. Yeah, taste is a determinant, but only midrabanan, not midarais. Gemara says, no. Iyachim seifa. Look at the end of that. Price is great. Adam Furthermore, the Gemara says you could even use it for matzah. So if you made a matzah, ultimately again with rice flour and wheat flour. Now, again, obviously, this is before the days of kitnius, right? This is before the days of kitnius legislation. Remember, kitnius legislation is drabana. Remember again, midaraisa, there's absolutely no problem using rice on Pesach, as our Sephardic, right? You're allowed to use rice on Pesach. So we Ashkenazim have kitnius. But again, this is before kitnius. So the Gemara says like this: if you have a matzah that is made from rice and wheat, right? As long as it tastes like wheat, halacha l'maaseh, it's usable for Pesach. Now, I'll say now again, for Pesach, you need biblical matzah, right? You need something that is made from wheat. So what do you see from here? The fact that you can use it on Pesach indicates to us that that taste is a determinant, not just rabbinically, but biblically as well. This contradicts what we just said before. We just said before that taste is not a biblical determinant, and now we're seeing that yes, it is. So how do we determine this? Ella, we'll say Amud Beis. Ella, here it is. We'll say it's a very important line. Ella min b'she'eino mina b'taima. In reality, when you have 2 dissimilar items mixed together, so the identity of the mixture is determined by taste. Inachinami, we do rely on tam. We rely on tam. Again, 2 dissimilar items mixed together, the identity of the mixture will be based on how Look at Rashi. Elamin b'sheino mino shatam nikarbo b'tayim mechai v'loki min haTorah. V'hi amarei shlagish b'pigol v'nosa shal min umino d'leka l'mikam hatayma v'lo tishma minei nosin tam barov lavdarai. So let's listen to this. So therefore, the Gemara says you're right. Tam, taste does play a role. When do we rely ultimately again on taste to determine the identity of the mixture? When is that? Remember, this is very important. Bin b'she'eno mino. Two dissimilar items mixed together, the identity of the mixture ultimately again will be based on what it tastes like. Based on what it tastes like, which essentially means whichever item is more dominant by dint of the fact that it infuses taste, that's the item which will determine the identity of the mixture. Now, by the way, just before we go on, how do you reconcile that with Reish Lakish's case about the pigol nosar and tamei salad, right? The pigol nosar, tamei cholent. What do you do with that? That has to be a case where they all were the same min. They were all the same thing. They were all the same thing. They weren't. Now watch us finish it up. Min b'mino beruba. Ultimately, again, when you have two similar items mixed together, so what determines the identity of the mixture? Ultimately, again, min b'mino. Rov, majority. So we'll say, so now this is really incredible and incredibly important. So Gemara is coming along, Rabbi is coming along and giving us a rule. When you have mixtures, how do you determine the identity of the mixture? To which the Gemara says, it depends on the mixture. Halacha recognizes two types of mixtures. Min b'mino, which means similar items. Min she'eno mino, dissimilar items. When it is min b'she'eno mino, dissimilar items, the identity of the mixture is based on taste. Taste, whichever is the more dominant item, by dint of its ability to infuse taste, that's going to be the item that determines the identity of the mino. When you have two items, you can't rely on taste. Why can't you rely on taste? They have the same taste. It's the same item. So what do you rely on? Whichever one has the greater majority. Whichever has the greater majority, that will determine the identity of the item. Incredible, Abba say. Incredible. I think, Marcia, 1 second. But I have a better idea. Why don't you go ahead and in a case of min b'mino, where you have two like items mixed together, why not treat it as a case of min b'she'eno mino? Right now, what does that mean? Watch this. That's very interesting. This nan. Nis'ariv beyayin, roa also ki'ilu hu mayin. I will say, Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said that if you have sacrificial blood mixed with wine. So again, I will say, remember again, what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said, we view the wine as if it's what? As if it's water. So what is the Mishnah doing? It's fascinating. Now again, let's still point out, blood in wine is min b'mino. Now, we'll say, why is blood in wine min b'mino? Why? Now, because remember, we often, generally in halacha, whenever you think about min b'mino, you're talking about items you're going to taste, right? We think about a taste idea. Obviously, sacrificial blood, you're not tasting, right? But the reason why blood and min b'mino is because they look the same. So what did the Mishnah say? If you have sacrificial blood mixed with wine, so what do? We view the wine as if it was water. And we would say, in this type of ratio, would the blood still maintain its appearance? If it would, then it's kosher. If it wouldn't, then it's puzzle. So what do you see from here? We take a case of min b'mino, and how do we view it? We view it as if it was min b'she'eno mino. So why don't we deal with every case of min b'mino like that? It's so interesting. So the Gemara says, it's not. It's arev b'yayin, rono sekilu hu mayim. My love. Rowan also liyayin kilu mayim. Are we not saying so again? So we mean over here is like this. We view the wine as if it was water, and in this ratio, if water mixed with blood, would the blood still look like blood? If so, then the mixture will be kosher, and if not, then it'll be puzzle. So you're taking a min b'mino mixture and turning it into a min b'she'eno mino mixture. Which is no, rowan also lidam kilu mayim. No, it really means we view the blood as if it was water, and then review ultimately again if the blood in this ratio is water mixed with water, would it still look like blood? Fish Gemara says it doesn't make any sense. Then ultimately again, what do you mean then it should say batal. Say batal. Furthermore, va'od. Roin also ki'ilu hu yayin odo. Furthermore, again, I will say there's another brisa. This is a fascinating case. Rabbi Yehuda, totally different case. Now, hold on for just a second. Rabbi Yehuda says we view it as if it was red, as it was red wine. Imdia mar'ehu kasher is a mikveh case. If the wine itself, if the vision of if the wine would have become lesser in color. Dia means lesser in color. Ultimately, again, it's kasher. This is a mikveh case. I'll say in just a moment. Vim lav pasal. And if not, ultimately, again, it will be pasal. We're going to define. Sigmar says Tanahi. In reality, this whole thing is a machlokes. Then I will say, so just I want to point out to you what just happened over here, because we'll have to stop in we have still another minute. So I'll say this whole thing is a machlokes tanoim. On one hand, the Gemara wanted to introduce principles. What were the principles? If you have min bamino, how do you know? Right? How do you do it? Min? Actually, let's reverse that, because the truth is the easier case in halacha is actually min b'she'eno mino. Two dissimilar items. How do you reckon? How do you deal with a mixture of two dissimilar items? How do you deal with it? Tom, taste. That's easy. That's easy, right? Whichever item exerts the dominant taste, that goes ahead and creates the ultimately again of the mixture. The more complicated one is min bamino. Similar items mixed in. So the Gemara says, how do you deal with min bamino? How do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? Ultimately, rove. It's just it's a numbers game. Whichever item is in the greater majority, that's the item that determines the identity of the mixture. The Gemara says, hold up. I have a better way to deal with min bamino. How do you deal with min bamino? How do you deal with it? To a min b'she'eno case, and that's what the Mishnah is doing, right? The Mishnah said that if you have sacrificial blood mixed with wine, what do you do? View the wine as if it's water, and then see how that impacts the saying. The Mishnah says that in min b'mino cases, make it into view it as it's a min b'she'eno mino case. To which the Gemara says this whole thing about min b'mino is a machlokes tanoim. Do we deal with min bamino just as a simple majority, or do we view it, or do we change it in min b'she'eno mino case? Raging, ridiculously amazing machlokes, and may to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Jabosai, have a great day. Have on Zoom. Shkoyach, everyone.